Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We are really excited to have a conversation about artificial intelligence and how it can be applied to what we're doing in public health, especially around 21C's work around public health transformation. We are joined today by Toshi Enders-Hu. He is the director of the Emerging Media Lab at the Institute for the Future, or IFTF, where he explores the implications of rapidly evolving technologies that are transforming the ways humans communicate, collaborate, and connect. Toshi leads IFTF's Technology and Media Foresight Council, advising leaders from both the public and private sector, and he is a lead instructor for IFTF's Three Horizons of AI course that explores the near, mid, and long-term implications for AI. Toshi's work examines not only the direct applications of emerging technologies, but also the wider implications and impact on individuals, organizations, and society at large. Prior to joining IFTF, Toshi served as a technology consultant for famed futurist Ray Kurzweil, and his work has been featured at the United Nations, TED, and the Smithsonian. So very impressive work so far in his career. Toshi is here today to speak with us about strategic foresight and the growing applications and implications of generative AI. Before I turn it over to Toshi, just wanted to remind folks that if you do have any questions during his presentation, feel free to put those into the chat, and then we'll have some time at the end of his talk and a demo for Q&A. So keep those questions coming as he's presenting. And with that, Toshi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Travis. Great to be here with you all. And yeah, as Travis mentioned, I'm going to start today with about a 35, 40-minute presentation introducing you to futures thinking, IFTF, introducing some basic concepts around generative AI. And then I'm also going to do, after that, a demonstration of how we are starting to use generative AI in our own practice, which will be both a little insight into our work, but also showing you how to engage with these large language models in ways that give you more interesting and useful results. And then we'll spend the last portion of our time together in discussion and having some questions and answers. So this is fantastic. I'm going to just share my screen out here. Be able to see. There we go. Fantastic. Okay. So my presentation today is entitled Generation AI, Getting Future Ready. And as Travis mentioned, I work at Institute for the Future. And of course, thinking about the future is very human. We all do it. And humans have been doing this for a long time, trying to anticipate what changes might come, how we might prepare for those things. But the challenge is our brains are actually not really wired to think about the future. Our brains are mostly wired to think about the past, what's happened, and then we take those experiences, those models of how the world works, and we project them into the present, and we actually even project them into the future. And this works great in most circumstances. It's how we learn. It's how we, know that the sun is going to rise in the morning. The challenge is that when the world suddenly becomes a place where things are changing, and the past isn't necessarily always a good indicator of what the future is going to look like. And we are increasingly living in what people call a VUCA world, a world full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and lots of ambiguity. So it's no wonder that everybody would love to have a crystal ball to be able to peer into the future, to know exactly what's going to happen and how to prepare. But the first thing I'm going to tell you today as a professional futurist is that nobody can predict the future. And don't believe anybody that tells you they can, especially if they're from here in Silicon Valley. And I would even warn you to maybe not use the concept of future-proof, because this often, sets us up with the idea that we know what's going to happen and that we're completely prepared for it. Which means you can often miss things as things don't necessarily work out as you might have anticipated. So what we like to say at IFTF is we really emphasize being future ready. And future readiness we define as the ability to anticipate systemic shifts, to understand their potential impacts, envision desirable futures, and engage in actions to shape preferred outcomes. We really believe that the future is not predetermined. It's actually something that we create by the decisions that we make and the decisions that we make are mostly driven by what our vision of what is possible. And really, so what we do at IFTF is we help the world become more future ready. And our mission, is to help the world think more creatively and strategically about possible futures, a range of possible futures. There is not only no one future, but we're all living in a multiverse of futures. The future is going to be different for everyone, depending on where you are. Our practice includes futures research, which I'll talk a little bit about today and give some demonstrations of. Also design, how do you communicate these ideas in ways that are effective and useful? And then we have a large education arm where we teach both our methodologies as well as a number of our design skills, how to create forecasts, how to create scenarios. And I'm even teaching a class around AI right now, which I'll mention at the end of the talk today. We are a nonprofit, and we're based here in Palo Alto, California. And we were founded way back in 1968, and we are the world's longest running futures organization. And in fact, we were founded back in the late 60s by a number of computer and social scientists working on what was at the time called the ARPANET. Today, we call it the Internet. And back then, this was a government project, funded project to try to develop and prototype a distributed communication network that would allow the country, at least the military, to operate under a nuclear attack. Actually, it's back in the 1960s. And back in those days, it was only a couple nodes. You can see there was only 4 locations, 4 nodes on the entire internet back then. And it was mostly military and academic institutions and for computers to talk to each other. They're not for human beings. Now, our founders, computer and social scientists, were working on this project, and they said, wait a minute, what if this small network grew out to be global network? What if this connected not just a few people, but everyone? And what if this was a mode for humans to talk to humans? And what if the world could share information and communicate in real time anywhere in the world? How might that change things? Oops. And of course, it has changed a lot of things. And in the last 50 years, the Institute for the Future has basically been focused on helping organizations in the public and the private sector anticipate and adapt to large changes. And we have a number of labs at IFTF looking at everything from the future of food, future of health, future of governance. We have an equitable futures lab. And I'm the director of the Emerging Media Lab, where we're focused on the future of human communication, collaboration, and connection, all through the lens of emerging media technologies. And there's a new emerging media technology on the horizon that you might have heard of that is poised to have potentially as much, if not more, impact than the internet itself. And that's generative AI. And generative AI is rapidly becoming the elephant in many, many, many different rooms across the world, as it is rapidly and widely deployed across a wide range of sectors. Now, at IFTF, we like to say, it takes 30, 40 years to become an overnight success. Things don't come out of nowhere. And artificial intelligence has actually, folks have been working on this since the 1950s. And even more recently, we've seen, examples of what's called classification AI appear in our lives in things like curating our social media feeds, or recommending movies to us on Netflix, or running our search engines. But generative AI is a new era, a new type of technology, a new generation of artificial intelligence. And we're starting to see this, pop up in our lives in the form of really very powerful and compelling chatbots, image generators that can create very realistic-looking images. And we're even seeing it being used in the scientific and medical research fields in things like AlphaFold, which won the Nobel Prize for being able to use generative AI to identify and anticipate new proteins. So classification AI, kind of the previous era of AI, it still exists, it's not going away, but the last version that we most interacted with, this was a form of pattern recognition. Okay, so for example, you could take a pile of photos of cats and dogs, put them through what's called a neural network, and that network would be able to basically classify those and determine which one were cats and which ones are dogs. Generative AI is different. It's pattern completion or pattern generation, right? You're actually taking data, training the network on it, and generating new data, not just classifying. So one of the most common examples that we might experience in these chatbots today is sentence completion. They're all basically designed to complete or predict the next word in every sentence, and then predict the next one and the next one and the next one. So you might prompt a system like this with something like, the garden was a beautiful ... And what you might get back from the system would be a variety of things. It could say beautiful flowers, beautiful trees. In some cases, it might say bugs. And this is a really unusual characteristic of software, right? We usually anticipate that software, when you put in an input, should give you the same output every time. Generative AI is different. Generative AI is what's known as non-deterministic. And what that word means is that it will produce a different result each time the same piece of data is entered. And this is a powerful creative force. It's very useful. It makes it interesting. It makes these chatbots engaging and surprising. But it's also very different than anything that we've experienced, especially within enterprise environments. And it makes it shape-shifting, meaning this technology behaves differently in every situation, every setting, and it can even behave differently in the same setting on the same day. And so we're all trying to grasp this very large, complicated, new thing in our lives, but we're only able to experience it through our own touch point. And that then becomes our idea of what the whole thing is. So much like the parable of the 5 blind people who are all grasping at a large elephant, trying to understand what it is, they each only have their own touch point. And you might have noticed that there's a lot of disagreement and a wide variety of viewpoints on what generative AI is, what it can do, what it can't do, what it's good at, what it's bad at, even if it's good or bad for society at large. And that's because it's just like this elephant. We're grasping it only at our own touch points, right? So some people are touching and saying, oh, this is a very articulate, very useful trunk that can do anything. Some people are saying, hey, this is a pointy tusk, beware. And then still others are saying, this is a stinky tail, look out. Other folks are saying, this isn't an elephant at all. It's actually a parrot. We'll get back to that in a moment. But for most people, their touch point has been ChatGPT. So let's talk a little bit about what that is. Well, first of all, one of the unusual things about ChatGPT is that technology adoption usually takes years, if not decades, to proliferate throughout society. And even with digital technologies like Netflix or Facebook, it typically takes months, if not years, for these digital platforms to get 1 million users. ChatGPT is down here at the bottom. It had 1 million users in 5 days. In 2 months, it had 100 million users. And keep in mind, this was a product demo that they put up. No marketing, no advertising, right? Just people trying it and telling other people like, hey, you should try this thing. It's not like any chatbot I've tried before. Now, not everybody has, played with ChatGPT. You might not be interested in generative AI or technology in general. One of the interesting things about this technology is, unlike virtual reality or other technologies where you have to go and choose to buy a VR headset and then want to put it on your face, you don't actually need to choose to adopt generative AI. It's coming to you. It's about to be in everything, everywhere, all at once. It's about to be in your Word documents, in your spreadsheets, in your email, in your slide decks, in your design tools, in your social media feeds, in your business intelligence tools, even in your kids' educational software. This is just a small selection of some of the companies who are racing to integrate generative AI into every aspect of our lives, our digital lives at least. So what is ChatGPT? Well, let's look into that a little bit. First of all, ChatGPT is really just a conversational interface, a chat interface to be able to talk to an underlying generative AI model called GPT. So what is GPT? I'm not going to go into deep technical weeds, but I'm going to share a couple concepts that I think will be helpful in trying to understand what it is and how we can think about it. So first of all, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer Model. And that's a mouthful, but let me just break it down. So generative is the part we just talked about. This is the new type of AI that's taking data and generating new data. The pre-trained means this is a form of machine learning, meaning these models are not programmed with instructions or rules by a human being. They're shown lots of data and given examples, and then basically, designed to say, okay, here's some examples, make things that are kind of like that. Essentially, that's what they are, right? Complete the sentence. Put a word here that would sound like something that should be said. And one of the things that's unique about GPT is that it's been trained on a massive amount of human data, over 1 trillion words, mostly scraped from the internet, but it's one of the largest machine learning models ever created. It took massive amounts of data and massive amounts of computing power to do that. The T stands for transformer, and that is the specific AI technology that was invented in 2017 and is just becoming now kind of utilized. And it's really one of the main factors that's able to take 1 trillion words and look at all of them and develop a map, a model of very complex relationships between these words. And that's how it's able to basically predict what might be a useful word to add to a sentence. So GPT is a powerful, what we call large language model. This is also a new type of AI that we haven't been using before. You might see the term LLM. And LLMs, large language models, are able, as we've seen, to generate very human-like language. And when I say language, I don't just mean human languages like Chinese or Spanish or French. It also means things like computer code and other forms of scientific and medical data, public health data. Anyway, any language that we use to communicate as humans, it's starting to learn how to communicate in as well. And increasingly, these models, these large language models, are going beyond just being able to read and write text. They're also able to read, take in, and output images, data visualizations, audio, video, 3D, charts, graphs, other forms of data. And it's these large language models that are going to be foundational engines for this new big tech revolution that's happening right now. But as I've indicated before, these large language models are not like other AI and not really like any other software that we've been using or that we're familiar with. The very fact that it's generative, that it's creative, is incredibly powerful, but it also means these systems are very unpredictable. Now, GPT is one of many models that are being trained and built and deployed. All the big technology companies are in an arms race right now to make the biggest, most powerful language models and make them multimodal. And there's also other organizations, some of them private, producing open source models, meaning models that are free to use and that you can even run locally on your own computers or on your own servers, so you don't have to upload data to the cloud. And even these open source models often, because they're based on the same technology as the closed source models, are often competing in their performance and abilities with the private models, which makes this a very interesting time. So these chatbots like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, Anthropic has one called Claude. These are just conversational interfaces on top of these large language models. Now, one of the biggest questions that everybody is asking is, can we call these things intelligent? And one of the problems with this question is we don't actually have a good working definition for intelligence that's agreed upon, at least. But we do have some data points that we can look at. So first of all, some of these models like GPT-4 are acing human intelligence tests and abilities tests like SATs and the bar exam. But at the same time, these models hallucinate, which means sometimes their output is completely not factual. A lot of times it is, and sometimes it isn't. And it makes things up, it hallucinates, as they call it, and it also does so confidently. As I said before, these systems are designed to predict the next word, meaning to make sentences that sound a lot like answers. And it turns out a lot of times the answers that sound like answers are correct answers. But unfortunately, a lot of times things that are not correct or make no sense are also presented, but they're presented in a way that the model presents them confidently, as well as sounding like an answer. Now, as I mentioned, some people think these are parrots. They're just mimicking humans, right? That kind of like, let's do something that sounds like intelligence. And so they call them stochastic parrots, right? Should we even be calling this intelligence if this is really just, prediction models applied to training data? Other folks are saying, well, maybe actually that's how humans work. And aside from cheeky comments from founders of large AI companies like Sam Altman, a lot of the most recent data and research around perceptual psychology and cognition are starting to point to this idea that our brains are actually prediction engines themselves, and that in many ways we're operating from our training data, and our way that we interact with the world is through a number of predictions. The other question that a lot of folks are asking is, are we approaching AGI, which technically stands for artificial general intelligence, as opposed to narrow intelligence? What they're really talking about is this like becoming at the level of human intelligence, or maybe even superhuman intelligence? Are we getting closer to that? And this is highly debated. A lot of folks think we're well on the path or getting closer. Some folks think this is nowhere near where we need to get, and this is a dead end. I think what we can safely say for now is we're not there yet, for sure. And probably more usefully, I think it's better to think of these systems as MGI, mediocre general intelligence. Because as we've seen, and we'll explore a little bit more, these are flawed systems. They are very limited in many ways, but they're also very powerful. And they're able to have some level of generalized intelligence. They're able to speak both, they can write a Shakespearean sonnet, but also tell you how to fix a V8 engine, or wax philosophical about a topic, or get in very deep on another topic. So they have a certain level of generalized intelligence, and they're able to do a lot of surprisingly generalized tasks. Previous forms of AI were narrow. They only knew how to play chess, or they only knew how to paint a car in a factory. I think for now, one of the best ways to think about these systems in terms of their intelligence and really usefulness level is to think of these more like really well-read, really well-meaning, really helpful interns who have very little real-world experience and often no common sense. So let's talk a little bit about what I like to call the superpowers and super problems of generative AI. And if, mythology of old and superhero movies of more recently have told us anything, is when we have superpowers, we often also have super problems. It's that combination of opportunities with challenges. So let's talk about some of the pretty impressive superpowers that these systems do have, right? You've probably seen that generative AI is able to write, essays and poems and recipes, even rap songs. You may have seen that it's actually pretty good at writing computer code. And you may have seen that these generative AI models can also generate really compelling images, and they're starting to be able to generate video. What you might not know or have seen is that these generative AI models are starting to do things like take your fast food order when you're in the drive-thru. They're starting to suggest military orders on battlefields. These models are starting to help people navigate legal systems. And in some countries, they're even proposing and suggesting laws and policies. Generative AI is starting to give medical advice, and sometimes with better empathy scores than human doctors. And in some houses of worship, people are reporting that actually generative AI, they've been using it for spiritual advice even. And in a world increasingly filled with an epidemic, as our Surgeon General has mentioned, of loneliness, it's not a surprise that literally tens of millions of people are looking to AI companions already to be, their friend, their coach, their therapist. Who doesn't want an AI companion that can always be there to listen and talk and support you? You may have seen just a couple of weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg announced that they're releasing a whole slew of these AI companions that you can talk with, based on folks like Kendall Jenner or even Snoop Dogg. And this is just one example. We're about to experience a lot of these synthetic humans in many aspects of our lives. So large language models are really powerful. They're able to do a lot of things. They're enabling human-machine natural language interfaces. And that just means really that, previously you had to be a technical person to be able to talk to computers. We've all had to learn how to interact with computers on their own terms. Quickly, these systems are being able to understand how humans communicate, and we can just naturally talk with them, which is incredibly powerful and allows us to put these natural language interfaces on top of other very powerful systems. And so we're moving into what a lot of folks are calling the age of conversational computing, meaning instead of programming your computer, instead of like writing a script or, doing things, you're just going to have a conversation with it. And beyond these kind of transactional conversations, once we start to like build out characters and personalities for these things, we're going to be moving beyond just conversations into an age of relational computing, where we're building up relationships over time, where these systems understand us, the context of who we are, what we're trying to do, what our preferences are. That can be very powerful. You may have seen the movie Her, that was released several years back. I just watched it again recently. I recommend watching it. It's in it, Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with his computer's operating system. That's an AI, a conversational AI, in the movie played by Scarlett Johansson. And this, what was once kind of like a fanciful sci-fi is going to start looking a lot more like reality TV. Just this month, ChatGPT has already added the ability to not just type, but to speak and have ChatGPT speak to you. One of the default voices sounds a lot like Scarlett Johansson. I don't think that's an accident. And if you spend any time not just typing, but talking with these systems, what you start to quickly realize, I found this myself talking with ChatGPT last week when it came out, it's a very different emotional experience than typing. When you hear a voice, it's just a different mode. So the question comes, what's going to happen with these emotions, these feelings that we're having with our machines? Eric Schmidt, the ex-CEO of Google, was just interviewed about artificial intelligence and generative AI, and particularly these chatbots. He was kind of pontificating about how he's very excited for the idea of the personalized tutors, right? This is something that a lot of folks, including myself, are really excited about. Everybody in the world having a personalized tutor that knows your learning style and guides you through a learning process. But he also mentioned the same interview, what happens when you fall in love with your AI teacher? And this is not a far out consideration. This is something that folks are really considering might be an issue very quickly. And what happens as we start to develop chatbots for people that we already have feelings for and relationships with? There's a number of companies like this that are building chatbots for people for deceased loved ones to allow you to keep them in your life, and, continue your conversation with them. And what happens when people start building chatbots for people and have relationships with and feelings for nefarious purposes? And this is also beginning to happen, right? People are starting to get calls from someone that sounds very much like their daughter or son or cousin or mother or, uncle, asking for money. And, it's very hard to determine whether or not this is somebody real or not. Last year, a CEO had 4 phone calls with somebody he thought was his CFO, and was so convinced that he wired him $250,000. Microsoft just released a paper a couple of months ago that shows you can now voice clone somebody with 3 seconds of audio of their voice. You might want to pause and wonder, is there 3 seconds of audio of my voice on the internet somewhere? Is there an image of me? Well, I think we can all answer yes to that. And this is getting easier and easier to do. You don't need a computer science lab and a supercomputer to do this. This is HeyGen. It's a publicly available platform. It has a free mode. Just this morning, I generated a deep fake of myself. And I'll share that with you right now. I'll let you be the judge of how convincing it is.
This is an AI-generated avatar of me that was trained with just 30 seconds of video footage using my normal webcam. I can now have this avatar say anything I type using this clone of both my image and voice. These digital twins can even speak in a variety of languages that the real Toshi doesn't speak. For example, here's me speaking in Spanish. Usando IA, puedo hablar en una variedad de idiomas de todo el mundo. Here I am speaking in Chinese. 使用人工智能，我可以说世界各地的多种语言。Soon, real-time generated versions of avatars like this will become the voices of AI-powered chatbots, making it increasingly difficult to know when you are talking to a real human or a generated AI version of them. What will this mean for humanity? And how will we adapt to this strange new AI-powered future? Welcome to life in the uncanny valley.
Thanks, ToshiBot. It's particularly difficult when the only way we're interacting is on Zoom, right? So I want to go back to this foundational technology concept, large language models, right? That's really the new AI technology here. That's what was powering that avatar you just saw. I want to emphasize this point to you. Language is not just words. It's not just how we talk or speak to each other. Language is the base operating system for all of humanity. It's how we initiate, navigate, manage all of our personal relationships, all of our professional relationships and agreements, and all of our political agreements, right? And we're about to introduce these large language models that, as you've seen, are really good at generating language that sounds a lot like human beings, even looks like them, into our information, communication, and decision-making systems. And right now, most people are just, having a little chat. You might get some information, some answers, some advice. But these systems, as they're deployed beyond just these kind of demo systems into actually other larger systems, they're going to start to have agency, meaning the ability to do things, to take action, to book a trip for you and actually pay with your credit card, to place an order with your supplier for your organization, to engage in a policy decision. And they're going to start to have autonomy, even many of these systems, if we give it to them, where they're going to choose, be able to have the choice of what actions they want to take. And so very quickly, we have some really important questions around things like accountability. Who's accountable for these actions and these decisions? And alignment. How do we make sure these systems stay aligned with our individual or our broader human goals, right? And even just safety. How do we make sure these aren't dangerous to society in general? So that's where we start to get into super problems. And I'm going to cover some of these right now. And we're still figuring out, again, we're also just still figuring out both the superpowers and super problems. This is an emerging story. This is all very new. ChatGPT was launched less than a year ago. So, there's a lot of folks who are quite worried and even sounding alarms around existential threats, right, from autonomous systems. And we've all, we all kind of know that story, right? We've seen Terminator, or at least we know it, or the HAL story of 2001, or even Frankenstein. There's a lot of mythologies and stories in our training data in our heads around, the killer robot system. And I would say, those are cautionary tales. We should be taking them very seriously, especially, like, as I said, we're starting to integrate these systems in to make decisions and have autonomy. But I would also say this, that sense of fear that a lot of us have with AI is in very much large part due to the training data, the bias of our training data. We've all seen movies and stories around this. And it turns out Hollywood will sell more tickets around a scary movie, around the Terminator. We have some movies like C-3PO, or characters like C-3PO, where they're friends. And that's not to say we shouldn't be concerned with the Terminator scenario. All I'm saying is, let's just be aware that a lot of that fear comes from those previous models that we've created through our entertainment industry. The next, big fear beyond kind of existential threats everyone comes to is, oh, okay, is this thing going to take my job, right? And that's a very serious question. Am I going to be augmented by this technology, or am I going to be displaced? And this is uncertain. If you look back in history of technological disruptions, as people have, things have been automated. We have seen a lot of augmentation and displacement. We've also seen creation of whole new industries and new jobs, right? And new opportunities, and in general, kind of growth around productivity and wealth in the world. But, it's uncertain. And this is a new type of technology. We've never before had a technology that's able to learn from the user. So that's a little bit different. It's also important to point out that today, the workers that are actually building these artificial intelligence systems, some of them are in, super high paying jobs here in Silicon Valley, but a large number of them are working in the developed world to help do like the training data, to do the fine tuning, to the labeling, often at like almost slave labor work. I point this out because often people just think, oh, this is just kind of magic. It comes from nowhere. There's a lot of human labor going into these systems that often isn't recognized. To say nothing of all the human labor that actually generated the training data that they took for free. The other, big imminent concern is, around deepfakes, right? Synthetic media. As you've seen, it's getting easier and easier to create fake images, fake video, fake audio. And this is going to be a big challenge, especially here in the United States as we enter an election year. I literally just saw a video of Jill Biden, President Biden's wife, that looked exactly like her, saying some pretty wild things yesterday that was generated by AI. And that's not the last we're going to see. We're going to see a lot of this. And of course, and I don't have to tell this crowd too about the challenges around misinformation and what can happen there. I'm also going to guess, just given the public health world, that we understand that there can be a lot of issues around biased systems. These systems are only as good as the training data we put into them. These are some of the women and researchers who have been calling the alarm around this for a while now, around the issues of how these, even classification AI, how these systems basically treat different people in different ways, depending on how they're represented in the training data. And as I mentioned, these large language models, they're trained on internet data and writing and language scraped from the internet. So it isn't necessarily unbiased, and it may be not the best representation of humanity. And as we said before, generative AI just makes things up. And that's foundational to how it's built. As I said, it's just underneath all of this technology designed to predict what might be the next likely word. And it might work well in like when the 5 times you try it, but if you try it 5,000 times or you install it in an enterprise system, when we scale it up, we don't know what these systems are going to do. And this points to just kind of this underlying factor of unpredictability in emergent systems, right? It's, if you're overwhelmed or feeling confused by this technology, I find it helpful to recognize that even the people who have created this technology, the technologists, the research scientists, they don't fully understand how it works or why it works. Remember, I told you this was not built by someone writing instructions. This was trained. It's a bit of a black box. It's very hard. It's issues of interpretability. We don't know why it's saying what it says. And it's unclear if we ever will fully be able to understand that around it. This is Geoffrey Hinton. He is actually one of the creators, the foundation, the godfathers of AI. He helped invent the concept of the transformer model, the T in GPT. And he, for the last several years, has been the lead at Google's AI department. He recently left his job because he said that he wants to be able to speak freely about his concerns. And I want to emphasize, this isn't because he absolutely believes it's going to do harm. Hinton actually thinks there's lots of great possibilities here, but he just doesn't know, right? We don't know what these systems are going to do. Now, I think it's important to be aware of issues, but I also don't want to leave you scared. There's also a lot of just big super problems in the world that are not AI related, for which AI actually might be incredibly powerful tools. So issues, medical research. A lot of folks see that this is potentially a great equalizer in terms of powering upskilling people, in terms of inequality in society. And it's certainly already being used in really powerful ways to help deal with some of the big super problems of climate change that we're also facing. But I think we have a lot of, in human history, we've got a lot of examples of cautionary tales about tapping into very powerful forces, which we don't fully understand, and can go awry if we don't know how to wield those powers or articulate what we're actually trying to do with our wishes. So, as I said, the world is going to need to get future ready for generative AI. And this is going to need to happen at many levels, at the personal level, right? For example, I've told my mom and many of my relatives, like, here's a password. When I say this word, you repeat that word back to me. That's how we confirm that that we're real. I recommend you all have a similar conversation, not online, not over email, with family members like that, because you're going to start to receive calls like this. We're also going to have to adapt at the organizational level. Major disruptions in many sectors. It's a general purpose technology, and the world is racing to implement this. And then, of course, this is going to have major societal level impacts as well. I know in a minute we're going to have a discussion, but just wanted to seed that discussion a little bit specifically with some thoughts I have around both some opportunities as well as challenges that are specific to the public health field. So one of the things that folks are most excited about in terms of generative AI is this idea of personalized healthcare, similar to a personalized tutor. Generative AI could help analyze patients' health records, genetics, lifestyle, and other factors to create, personalized health plans, as well as interactive coaching tailored to an individual's learning style and culture or language or their preferences. Also, I know a big component of public health is, communications and engagement with the public, right? And generative AI models can generate audience-specific messaging and educational materials for highly targeted marketing and messaging campaigns. And also AI can help monitor public sentiment and discourse around on social media to identify misinformation, knowledge gaps, and attitudes. Some folks believe that this could also have positive impacts on access and equity. You know, multilingual chatbots could expand access to health services and information for underserved communities, you know, by providing 24/7 automated support and close some gaps in human staffing. Generative AI models could also identify gaps in health equity, all right, by analyzing population health data across demographics and enabling public health agencies to allocate resources to improve quality. Generative AI is also really good at scenario development. I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. Generative AI models could rapidly analyze population health data to predict potential, outbreak scenarios and model how different interventions could impact public health outcomes, and create simulations to help public officials, workers be better prepared to respond to a wide range of possible scenarios. Also, just in the general medical and health field, there's a lot of excitement already happening in medical and drug research. Generative AI is already analyzing massive amounts of health data to identify potential detection systems, treatments, and drugs. And models are already being used to simulate drug interactions, side effects, and potential efficacy to accelerate clinical trials. And then lastly, this is something that applies to basically all industries, but this is no small thing, right? Workforce augmentation and automation, right? Generative AI models can, like chatbots and virtual trainers and teachers, can provide training and education to expand capabilities of existing workforces. And AI can automate administrative tasks to allow healthcare workers to focus on critical thinking, creativity, and human-centered care. So, while we're already seeing like incredible breakthroughs, like this is a study from Harvard where they have a new AI tool that can predict viral mutations and help make vaccines for that. That's big. That feels like a big deal. But at the same time, a lot of doctors are saying, like, even beyond miracle cures, just helping us do our paperwork, just helping us take our patient notes is going to take huge loads off of our time and our mental capacities. We've seen a signal of Blue Shield of California advancing holistic care and management, right? Reducing enrollment time from 24 hours to 5 minutes on certain processes. Let's talk about some challenges. And again, this is just a short list. As we know, big issues with health data, sensitivity, and privacy. There's going to be big questions around regulation and compliance. The governments are trying to even wrap their heads around how do we even develop regulation and enforcement around AI. As I'm sure many of you know, there's always already issues with AI quality and bias of training data. And that's, a lot of these private models, we don't even know what's in the training data. Integrating generative AI across fragmented IT systems and legacy software already, I'm sure, poses lots of challenges, and this is going to be no different. We touched upon the reliability, and these systems aren't really great at explaining them, so we're going to need ongoing auditing. We're just humans in the loop. We're going to need experts in the loop because, as I said, a lot of times the answers sound like the real answers. And then also, and I know this was a big issue during the COVID pandemic, just proliferation of misinformation. As you can see, it's so easy to do this. Just one other example I'll give you of that. This is a platform called Indio.ai. You put in a prompt and it doesn't just generate text or an image, it generates a whole video and it generates a script, and it has a voice that reads the script. It generates music. It grabs stock imagery to make out that video. So I made this the other day. I just said, create a 2-minute video explaining how the COVID epidemic was faked by the government to increase control over citizens to steal their freedom. Clicked generate video.
Ever wondered about the real origins of COVID-19? What if everything you've been told is just smoke and mirrors, a facade? Could there be more to this global pandemic than meets the eye? What if I told you there's a theory that COVID-19 was a government conspiracy? Consider these pieces of evidence that might change your perspective.
Goes on and on. That's just a quick prompt, and you can make endless numbers of these. So I just want to leave you with this, that it's not the strongest. Oh, sorry. A quote from what has often been attributed to Charles Darwin. I don't know if he actually said it, but I think it is really critical and helpful in this moment as we're dealing with an evolution moment. And that is, it's not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. So in a moment, I'm going to field some questions. I wanted to, before we could do that, and while you're thinking about your questions, I wanted to just quickly do a demo of how we're using generative AI at IFTF, so you get a sense of some of that. But just to seed, I know that pretty much the number one frequently asked question that I get is, where do I start? And the answer for everybody is, you need to develop literacies around this technology. And that means I really encourage you to prioritize hands-on experiences. One of the unique things about this technology, it's not locked away in some research lab. You can just go online and try it. And I'll show you an example of how we've been testing with it. And you really need to inform some nuanced sense of its capabilities and its limitations also. And that's in order to build some new intuitions and challenge your old intuitions, especially if you've used AI before or software before. And just reminding you that this is multifaceted. Don't stop with one idea about it. Don't just read one article and say, okay, now I know what this is. There's many different touch points and many perspectives to really contemplate. And then this is a rapidly evolving space. So unfortunately, we also need to track developments as we not only see new technologies, but people understand the issues and opportunities around them. So I'm going to run a quick demo for you just to give you a little bit of that, at least the heads in, if not the hands on. You can follow along with me at home, basically. We're still figuring out what generative AI is good for. But what we do know, as I hope I've put to you today, is that it's not a reliable answer finder, right? We have information retrieval systems for that. It can find answers that are sometimes not only right, but very insightful, but it's not reliable. That said, generative AI is an unprecedented possibility explorer. That's really where it shines. People thought AI couldn't be creative, and this has proven that wrong. And generative AI is actually uniquely suited for the futures forecasting work that we do because, this is what's called a futures cone. Our work is about helping to expand people's vision to the range of the possible futures that could happen beyond just the projected future, what you assume is going to happen, that things are going to continue as they've gone, right? We need to look not only just at the plausible and the probable and the possible, but we also expand out to what we call the preposterous, things that seem impossible, right? I think a lot of people thought it would be impossible that the world would come to a halt for, a year or two during COVID, but that happened, right? And that's important because it's not until we get all the way out to the preposterous that we can also identify the areas of the preferable futures that we want to try to navigate to. And a lot of our work as strategic foresight practitioners is about developing forecasts and scenarios. And forecasts are not like a weather forecast or a quantitative forecast. In strategic foresight, forecasts are provocative and plausible statements about the future designed to surface insights in the present. They're more provocative than they are predictive. And then scenarios, forecasts are basically descriptions of those futures. Scenarios are the speculative storytelling that really brings those forecasts to life and reveals the nuance and perspectives that you can only get through imagining what it's like to live in that future as an individual or try to operate in that future as an organization. So we've been developing some frameworks. This is one of them for what we like to call human and AI futures forecasting. We believe that it's going to be used as a tool, not as a replacement. And that is essential because there's things that humans are good at and not so good at, and things that AI is good at and not so good at. And it's the combination of the two that's very powerful. So I'm going to walk you through just high level of the 5 steps of this framework. The first step is framing the conversation. So if you are using one of these chatbots, one of the things you need to know right off the bat is that it's important to frame what you want the chatbot to do. Give it a role, give it a goal, and give it some context about what you're trying to do, and just explain that in natural language. The second step is really, in this framework, is for us to begin exploring some future forecasts. Then we're going to go and try to create some storytelling, some points of view within those futures. And then one of the things not everyone is aware of is that generative AI is actually a really interesting tool for creating plans as well as challenging your plans and interrogating your plans and assumptions. So we're going to do a little bit of that. And then the step 5 is how do we then want to frame the forecasting work that we've explored, depending on what our goal is with the project. And the tool that I recommend folks, if they've never tried, is something called PHAB.com. It's a free website you can go to. And what's unique about it, as you see here on the left, it's not one chatbot. It's a collection of different chatbots. So you can try out ChatGPT, but you can also try out the other chatbots like Claude Instant. We're going to use that for our demo today. And it's really helpful to see how these different models work. They even have some of the open source models. I've asked it some questions the other day, and I asked all the different models to see how they answered differently. This is really critical for building up your awareness and intuition. So we're going to use Claude Instant today. You know, it's basically a competitor to ChatGPT. Yeah, we'll walk through that. And I'm going to not do it live, so you don't have to watch me typing. I've just done some screen captures of me doing this. So you get the sense of what the flow is. The other thing I'll note is when you do this yourself, I'm going to go through this very quickly just to give you the high-level tour. You would want to do this slowly. The whole purpose of this is to generate quickly with AI and then use your human intelligence, your human awareness, contextual awareness to go through and look through what's interesting, what's worth exploring more deeply. That's really kind of the main interaction here. Just like any conversation you'd have with somebody, you're not going to get to the most interesting answer in the first question and answer. You need to develop the conversation. One of the nice things about generative AI and these chatbots is they remember a certain number of things you've said before, so you can build up context and explore more nuanced, complex ideas without having to explain yourself at every entry. So step 1 is framing the conversations. Remember, we're going to assign a role and some goals to the spot, and we're going to choose a topic, in this case, to explore futures. So my prompt to Claude Instant was just, you are a futurist that helps humans explore a wide range of possible futures by generating provocative long-term forecasts and speculative scenarios 10 years in the future. The futures topic we're focusing on is generative AI. You can see it's just natural language, and you can put any topic. You don't have to look. It's a little meta today. We'll explore generative AI using generative AI. And then boom, we get a pretty quick response from Claude Instant. That's why it's called Instant. And right away, it's very helpful. It knows what we're trying to do. It right away offers a bunch of different potential, forecasts and provocative statements about generative AI. But we want to then go and focus more specifically on the topic. And today I want to look at specifically generative AI and the impact on education. Okay. So I'm going to nudge it towards my specific interests, and I'm going to kind of look for interesting ideas and ask it to expand those out. So I'll say, can you generate some more ideas about education? And note, I didn't say education and generative AI. It knows because it remembers the context of what I've said. We get a bunch of different ideas here. Again, I would, and what I did when I generated this, I actually read through these in detail and thought about it. The one I thought was interesting was this idea of augmented teachers. So you could explore and dive in and out. Let's just jump to step 3 where we could start to, sorry, we'll not expand on that idea. So we're still exploring the forecast. Let's say more about teacher augmentation. Gives me a bunch of different ideas about what augmented teachers could look like, AI augmented teachers. Now I want to start exploring scenarios. So let's generate some scenarios. And again, it's looking at the past context to help generate the scenarios. So it's going to draw from those ideas and exchanges. So my prompt is just simply write a scenario about an augmented teacher. So we get a story. In the story, Maria is a middle school math teacher. Her school has provided an AI teaching assistant named Carl. This is about 9 years in the future. And what I thought was interesting in this scenario was Claude Instance is kind of add this interesting aspect to the story. Carl, the AI assistant, generates a pre-made lesson plan based on curriculum. While these plans aim to meet students' needs, Maria finds that the AI doesn't always get the nuances of her diverse group of learners. She ends up modifying half of the proposed lesson plans to make them more effective. So in this case, it wasn't just AI did everything perfectly. So let's explore, some more details and variations on that same world that we're starting to generate. So I say expand on the types of nuances the AI might miss about different learners. We get a quick list of those. The one I thought was interesting was social and emotional needs, right? An AI may not be the best at identifying those in the same way a human can. So let's simulate some more points of view within this scenario. So I said, write a diary entry from a high school student who had some social emotional needs that his AI teacher's assistants missed, and then how the human teacher intervened. We get a diary entry from that point of view of a student going through that. We get some more nuance to that we could explore. Let's get another perspective. Write a scene between two teachers who have introduced AI into their classrooms, and one is surprised how well it's worked, and the other has had many frustrating problems. And right away, we get this interesting dialogue, and it continues our character Maria from earlier. But let's not stop there. Let's get another perspective in this world. Write a memo from a principal to his teachers where they grapple with the challenges and benefits of AI in the classroom. Now we get a perspective from an administrator, and trying to deal with this complex world that we're starting to flesh out. Okay, you could just endlessly go. Spend many hours going to these kind of rabbit holes. It's actually quite fun and interesting. But let's go to step 4. Let's work with some strategies, and let's generate and explore some possible action plans here. So what could be a 5-point action plan for a school looking to integrate AI over the next 10 years? And boom. And I'm not going to say this is the best action plan. I wouldn't recommend just copying and pasting this and sending out to your organization, but it's a starting point. And it's a starting point that also integrates the whole conversation and the issues that you've already discovered. And in fact, AI is actually really good at interrogating and kind of breaking your plans. So let's do that. Let's look at implications and consequences. So let's say, what are some potential unintended outcomes of this plan that you just proposed? And it gives us a whole bunch of these, everything from, mission drift or exasperating inequalities. So now we've, created some forecasts, some scenarios. We had a plan. We've looked at some of the problems it could create. Let's integrate all that. Let's define some principles to pursue preferred features. So what are some principles that could help ensure preferred outcomes for this future? And it lists off a bunch, actually really good. Again, you're going to need to go through this, but it's a starting point for you, right? So issues like transparency or principles like adaptability, inclusiveness. Okay, step 5 is what we call a reframe the forecast. So you might just be doing this for personal exploration, but if this is in a context that you're trying to actually work with a group, you have an actual assignment or a goal, consider your goals, consider your audience, think about how you want to frame this in a way that's going to be useful, right? These forecasting. One of the main form factors we like to use at IFTF is called headline for the future. So let's write a news article with a headline 10 years in the future about this story that we've been exploring. So the prompt was, write a news story from 2033 about the school successfully pursuing this plan, the challenges they faced, the insights they gained in the process. And I always like to include this. Include some surprising details and twists in the story. You get juicier stories that way. And quotes from stakeholders and experts. Start with a pithy headline that will grab readers' attention. And we get one. Let's see. How one school learned to leverage AI to augment, not replace great teaching. Not sure that's the best one, but you could just say, I don't like that one. Give me one more. Give me another. Give me 5 more, right? It never gets tired. You can just keep exploring and nudging. You could say, I want to write it again, but consider the world is dealing with climate change at the same time, or how would this, consider more like special needs learners. You can nudge it at any moment. And sometimes it's useful to kind of get an entirely different type of view on the exploration. It's very intellectual exploration we just went in through. So I often just say, take everything we've just talked about and write a poem for me, kind of sum it up. And we can get some surprisingly insightful poems. Variation of that is you can do a rap song too, if you want. And then, as I said, these tools are getting multimodal. Like ChatGPT now has an image generator built in, so you can just say, like, make me an image that illustrates this idea. Poe is nice. It has a stable diffusion in it, so you can generate images. So quickly said, a futuristic classroom, AI bot augmenting human teachers and students. And I got an okay image. I would probably iterate on this a little bit more, but the point is this is the kind of output you can create. So that's an overview of, like, our framework for this. This is by no means the only framework, but I wanted to give you an idea of not just framework, but how to kind of nudge and move and work with a human AI collaboration. So that's the end of my formal presentation. I want to open it up to questions and just some conversation too. I know you're all experts in your own field. While you're generating those in the chat, I'm also just going to put up, if you're interested in connecting more with IFTF, you just can go on our website at iftf.org. There's a QR code if you want to scan that. And we have courses if you're interested just in futures thinking. I also am an instructor and lead content creator for 3 Horizons of AI. It's a new course exploring this in more depth and how your organization can use foresight tools to build out forecasts and scenarios and strategic planning for generative AI. We have podcasts. There's a really great one, number 5. It's an interview I did with Ethan Mollick, who's a really incredible researcher around looking at both future of AI and education as well as work. He works at the Wharton School of Business. And really the best way just to kind of stay in touch and in the loop is our newsletter. If you want to just sign up for that, I'll put the QR code up again. And that's where you're going to get updates on our research, our events, our classes, our offerings, and all of such. So I'll put that up if you want to scan that. I'm going to look into the chat and see what some of the questions are here. Give me a moment to kind of catch up and guessing. I'm going to scroll back to make sure. Let's see. Okay. I know it's a lot, by the way. So take a moment to think about it. But and feel free to not just ask a question, but if you had a thought, or if there was just like an insight you had, that's also helpful. So let's see. I'm going to look, and I see Joshua Pecora here has a question. On the subject of misinformation, is there a potential to use AI to detect AI for finding fakes and misinformation? Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share so it can kind of come on here as well. Let me just see if everybody's here. So Joshua, great question. Yes, that's an obvious, important step. Like, how could we create basically AI detectors? And there's been a lot of work and research into doing this. The companies who are making it, like Google and OpenAI, have built AI detectors. At least currently, none of them work, which is a problem. OpenAI had an AI detector for text, especially because teachers were really wanting it to see if students were, using ChatGPT to write their essays. The problem was that they were giving positives, meaning things that were human written were actually triggering a flag saying this is AI written. There's lots of research on this being done. If everyone saw a paper from MIT, no one has cracked that code yet. People are talking about a combination of not just detectors, but like requiring that people put watermarks on images or video to identify them as AI. The challenge that researchers are finding is you can put watermarks on and you can also take them off. So that's really challenging. So I wish I had a better answer for that, but that is the case. I'm going to go to another question from Michael. Toshi's talked about having a personal code. Actually, you know what, Michael, a meeting today, would you want to come on camera and just ask your question? We could just talk. Are you still here, Michael?
Hey, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I invite anybody else that wants to come on camera too, so we can have a little huddle here.
Yeah, so I thought this was super interesting. The part you talked about having the personal identifier when you're talking with like a loved one or family member. And here at our health department, We're putting out a lot of external communications, written materials, videos, social media. If there are, I guess, fake artificial intelligence out there, how do we make our content, how will the public know that it's us, truly know that it's us and not some fake artificial intelligence?
Really important question. Unfortunately, no one has the answer for that yet. But what I would say is this isn't, when I talked about we're going to have to respond at organizational levels, that's not just internally. Organizations like public health agency are going to need to join in and actually making the calls to say, like, this is a critical thing that we need to be doing. We need to be looking at from a technological standpoint, like how could we try to create watermark systems or detection systems that work? We need to look at it from a regulation standpoint. We need to look at it from just kind of a human societal norms standpoint. How do we create those? But unfortunately, I would say people talk about, AI is taking over the world. My biggest concern in the next year is how we're going to be able to do sense making collectively. We're already in a divided world. We already have a lot of misinformation, and we're about to have a lot more of it. I wish I had better news for you on that, but this is one of the biggest challenges that we need to be like addressing, raising alarms around, and advocating for solutions on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Sure. Lydia, are you here? Would you be willing to come on camera and share your question?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, what do you think is like most important for policymakers and governments to know about AI technology when they're creating policies around privacy, accountability, and compliance?
So the first thing to know is just to develop, as I said in my slide, basic literacy. A lot of people think they already understand what AI is, and as I pointed out, this is very different. The second thing to understand and to know is that this is a rapidly evolving story. Even like, as I said, the people who made it don't even understand how it works or what it's going to do in different situations. So it's not like you can just go and read the book or look at the instruction manual and say, okay, we see how this works, and here's how the solutions that we need to prepare for. The third thing is we just, we're about to run the largest, fastest technological experiment on humanity as people are racing to deploy this in all these spaces. And so there's, on one hand, that sounds a little ridiculous or kind of irresponsible. If you look at there is another perspective on this, which is, and this is the perspective of OpenAI. They're saying their kind of ethos, at least initially, was they've changed their mission now that they've taken money from corporate interests, but their initial mission was that once they ran their initial experiments, found that these transformers models were actually very powerful, and they could see kind of like anticipate, as we scale this up, these are going to be major kind of driving forces in all of humanity. We need to develop it in order to, we need to do the actual research and development so that we can figure out how to do the alignment part of this. So that's kind of, in all these companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, they have a research arm that's trying to build this stuff. And then they have what they call alignment research and trying to figure out, okay, now that you've built that, what does it do? And how can we understand and anticipate what it's going to do? How could we put in technological, social, legal, or controls in this? And unfortunately, this is just bubbling up. No one knows. So I would say engagement is probably the most important thing. Engagement is building literacy, also engaging and advocating within your sector for like letting people know, like particularly things like I shared today, like, the companies that are going to be selling this technology, very few of them are going to be pointing out the unreliability hallucination issue. And it makes it, and part of why this technology is very impressive and very seductive, and why ChatGPT grew so quickly, it demos great, right? The demo is very impressive. And you might even only get one like weird error or hallucination and you might blow that off. You're like, oh, that was funny. When you start, no one knows how these things are going to work at scale and how to monitor them, right? So again, I'm sorry I don't have like a more concise, here's the 5 steps. This is a problem that we're all going to be navigating at many different levels. But thank you for the question. Krista, are you here and would be willing to come on camera and share your comment? Krista, you still here? I guess it's a comment I can just read. This is the power and the uses are intriguing, but the concerns and fake material are substantial. I would agree with that comment. Let's see, David, are you here? David Lee, would you be willing to come on camera and share kind of your comments and thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. So I used to work at the New York City Department of Health. I'm over at PHAB now. And we had a big group of informaticians, and it was cool. I was catching up with them shortly, maybe like a couple of months ago over a happy hour, and they're talking about this interest in using generative AI for really for data cleaning and parsing from like standardized messages that we get from laboratory. I don't work there anymore. That they get from like laboratory reports. These are like, they're highly structured. So like I can conceivably think of a way to tune a model based on a lot of the human labeling that they do anyway. The problem is that there's some diseases where like you can't really afford to screw something up, and you need like a high sensitivity for picking up on certain surveillance reports, like Ebola, right? Can't afford false negative on a message there. So they spend a lot of human time, like folks with MPHs, PhDs, every week they would spend dozens of hours reading through these very carefully. So there's interest in training an AI model to take some of that off of them for some of the like less high risk diseases, like maybe something like salmonellosis. I don't know if that's a great example, but certainly not like something like Ebola, right?
Yeah.
But the concern is that at a lot of, one, like you mentioned, there's a lot of bias, and we don't really know what goes into the black box of a lot of these products. The second one is that they're uncomfortable sending something that's like a software as a service, like ChatGPT, because they're just not comfortable sending their data out to something that is externally hosted and owned, like understandably so. And I think maybe for a really well-resourced health department, they can take something open source that's been, trained already, and then fine-tune it themselves and, hosting it internally. But I think for most health departments, they don't have those resources for cloud compute. They're not going to have the metal for it, data engineering and data science staff. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how government, specifically public health, can start leveraging these technologies that I think maybe other like for-profit companies, like they have a lot more resources and they probably care less about the biases.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're exactly right. And in fact, the CTO of OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT, has openly said in interviews, this is new stuff. Don't use it for high stakes environments. Like that's just accepted, right? That's not what they're going to be. That's not what the marketing is going to say from a lot of the companies that are building products on top of it. But that's just needs to be understood. And of course, public health and the medical or the healthcare world is high stakes, right? Unfortunately, you can't bury your head in the sand and say, okay, well, we're just not going to deal with this, because it's going to be a factor, as you know, like just from a kind of public misinformation standpoint. And there are incredible opportunities. So what I would recommend, I mean, in some ways, I think public health is probably ahead of folks in just your savvy around the issues around bias and data. A lot of people aren't. They think data, AI, magic, perfect, right? I'm going to guess you folks are much more aware of the nuances around understanding training data. So that is an issue. David pointed to and asked the question like, okay, maybe public or agencies are going to lag behind private. In some ways, I would say you might be in a better situation, right? Because for-profit companies right now are so driven by the story and the hype that like they're going to miss out if they don't go all in right now, and that's kind of the message that they're getting. And an interesting stat that I read the other day: LinkedIn has a future of work report every year. They just released it. It's pretty interesting, and just that it's all about generative AI. The future of work is just about generative AI for the most part. There's a lot of interesting data, but the one that stuck out to me was this: terrible with numbers, but I believe it was 71% of business leaders feel that they do not have a sufficient working knowledge of what generative AI is. 86% reported they've already started initiatives. So in some ways, your constraints and your kind of maybe actual, like the limitations that you have around kind of compliance and things might help you hold back a little bit and let the other folks be those early adopters right now. I think that might be the better place to be, because a lot of people are moving too quickly in this space. To your point, just to unpack a little bit about what you said about open source models, let me just expand that a little bit. So right now, kind of the ways that you would adopt generative AI would be either from like a public, basically cloud service, right? Like OpenAI or Google or Microsoft. You'd pay subscriptions, you'd get access for every query or a seat and things, kind of those standard enterprise models. And as you point out, there's the two main issues there. One, it costs, right? Every interaction. Typically, in the past, software usually is like, oh, okay, I just, is marginal scaling costs, right? This requires a lot of compute every time you run it. I mean, compared to just like querying a database, it's expensive, right? Especially now, it's just early and it's very inefficient. So it's costs. And you mentioned there's constraints in public health, but the other issue is privacy, right? Is you're now passing data and you're operating under HIPAA compliancy and all these things. So the second option for organizations to begin even just sandboxing, and I would recommend, if there is funding in your organization, to first start with just education and awareness. That's the most important thing. The next thing is, if you are able to run small, controlled sandbox experiments, no stakes experiments, because again, you're not going to be able to know what it means for your organization or your sector until you like work with it. And actually, you're going to be taking part in this kind of open research project that everybody's putting forth. But if you're to do that, you can download a free model. Meta has made their LLMs, very powerful LLMs, compete with GPT free and commercially available, and anybody can download it. And not only is that great because it's free, but you can download, they have 3 sizes of their model, large, medium, and small. The large model is if you want going to run on like a big server. The medium model will run on your laptop. The small model will run on your cell phone. And so not only is that convenient and not expensive, but it allows you to control where your data is going. So there's a lot of options there. And it's kind of good news, typically and some often, or I should say, open source sometimes lags behind private. In this case, a lot of these open source models are turning out to be as powerful. The other thing just to note is the technology is so new that right now, like everything is like, what should I say? I forget the term, but basically they've just made the biggest models they possibly can to do everything. What we're going to see in the next year as this ecosystem matures is you're going to have specialty models that are smaller, cheaper, right? And you're not going to be using one model. You're going to have an orchestration of different models talking to each other. And actually, you're going to have an orchestration of humans and AI models working together, checking each other, contributing to each other. And in fact, if you peel back the hood on GPT-4 from OpenAI, it already is what's called a mixture of experts model, is multiple models underneath there. So, right now we just look at, GPT, and it is very, very powerful and it works great and they've done a great job, but like, this is just the beginning. This is like, the briefcase size cell phone right now. We're early days. Let's see if we can get to one more here. Let's see. I see Joshua, would you mind coming on camera and just, I think maybe we rephrase the question. Let's see. Yeah. Well, David, maybe just you can read what you just said here, your final comment here.
Oh, no, I just responding to something you said where like public health is in a good position because we do look for bias. And I think I think like probably epidemiologists and economists in particular are really good at this for like understanding bias and more about causal inference. So like public health does have folks in the disciplines that could avoid some of the pitfalls that other early adopters might fall into.
Yeah, and I participated in a webinar last week with the Association American APA, Psychologist Association, and they're grappling with issues that we're talking about here, like ethics, policy, confidentiality, all these things. And I thought that the panelists had some really great thoughts, which is, we're already in an industry that's grappling with this, right? And so we do have experience with these questions around data privacy, data bias, all these kinds of things. So we're not starting from nothing. And we already have some principles in place around those. And so sometimes, yes, and this is why I encourage literacy in generative AI, but also leverage your existing knowledge, policies, and norms within your organizations and industry. The other point I heard from somebody say too is that, right now, or I guess right now, because there's so much hype, a lot of people are assuming, and particularly companies that are just focused on efficiency, like, okay, can we just fire everybody and just put an AI in? Can we automate everything? I think, that's a little bit simplistic in thinking. I think what we're going to find very quickly is that, we have all these studies that are coming out right now called AI exposure studies, where basically they say let's look at all these different professions. Let's break every profession down into a list of tasks. Let's give that task a number of AI, if AI could do it, and then add everybody's numbers up and then put everybody on a list to show who's most at risk, right? And at the bottom, if you want to be safe, be a roofer is at the bottom of the list. Things that people are doing, physical things that are not going to be translate. But at the top of the list was things like English teacher. And I don't know about you, but my high school English teacher, sure, I learned how to write and grammar and things like this. I also learned how to be a human being from her, right? There's a whole layer of relational intelligence, emotional intelligence, just tacit embodied intelligence that these systems not only can't do, they're not even aware of. And it's extremely, I know people want these, everybody wants to read the chart of how how risky they are being replaced. But the problem is they're extremely reductionist, right? I think a lot of people who are saying oh, great, I can have an executive assistant and AI. Well, how many of these folks who are getting this executive assistant are going to realize, oh, actually, the social and emotional labor that my assistant did wasn't on these charts, but is actually really valuable to me. And I am hopeful, and this I think does have some implications to healthcare in general and public health and well-being, that I'm hoping that by kind of reducing everybody to transactional tasks and then trying to replace and then being disappointed with that, we're actually going to become a lot more aware of how much our society is run on social emotional care, right? Anyway, I know we're at the end of our time, I believe, so I don't want to go further, but it's been fascinating. I really appreciate, especially the folks that were willing to come on camera and chat. It's great to meet you and hear, and it's been a great opportunity to talk about this. So I encourage you to reach out to IFTF. I'll just pop up our QR code if you want to sign up. We'd love to stay connected. We're very focused on civics futures, so we're very interested in continuing to be engaged in the public health community.
Thank you so much, Toshi, and right on time. So I did pop in a webinar evaluation link if you have a moment to complete that. Thank you, Toshi, for just providing so much great information and hosting a great discussion at the end here. As Toshi said, let either him or myself know if you have any questions. We'll make sure we get that to him and his team. But otherwise, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your attendance. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you again.